Lunacid is a first-person action role-playing horror game set in a dark fantasy world, where you awaken after being dumped into a well and begin searching for a way out of this cursed place. The game is available on Steam. Atmosphere. Lunacid is inspired by early From Software games and nails that atmosphere perfectly. The isolation and emptiness spreads across several biomes, and you feel it in the cold brick structures, dead cave systems, and desolate castles. But despite how empty they are, you can still feel like a trespasser as you engage with the world. Many of the game's environments are just creepy, eerie, or sorrowful, and what path you take and where you end up in the game will ultimately determine the mood, as the atmosphere inside each individual area varies wildly. Some are nerve-wracking, others are peaceful. But the thing that unites the atmosphere as an experience is the tension from the maze-like environments that sprawl and intertwine as you delve deeper into the unknown realms. Do you push further on and risk dying, or go back now and waste all your progress? You don't know what you're going to bump into next, how strong it will be, or even what it will do to you. The nature of dungeon crawling puts an ever-present strain on your resources, and the combat can be messy, with melee engagements being risky for you as well as your enemy. But range combat too can be reliant on how many mana potions you have. It's a form of resource management that determines how far you can go before things start getting desperate. Lunacid's atmosphere sometimes befits a horror game perfectly, when you're exploring a temple full of mummies with holes in their heads, like their brain burrowed out through their faces, but sometimes it's a chilling gothic horror library or a grim prison. While some areas don't inflict fear or dread at all, most of them give you something, and they all work together to make the game world feel consistent. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. Dealing with enemies is about all the fear the game generates, but it does it in a way that doesn't necessarily make the combat the highlight, just the encounter, with enemies that are sometimes eerie, bewildering, powerful, act strangely, or are just hard to comprehend the nature of. Some things in the game are frightening because of how hard they are to understand, with some areas clearly having something alive in them but you're unable to see anything. The sound of a shrill war cry or pained scream coming from an empty corner of the room or creeping up behind you. There's a lot of things that are scary in concept thanks to the existence of other things, like the spell that gives sentience to objects and can make pots come alive and start screaming. But besides the enemy encounters, most of which are not frightening with the exception of a few, the game doesn't try to do much else. Though not disappointing, there was a potential for a lot more. That's still one Harry Mason. Sound design. The game's music really fits the aesthetics, with some pieces that go a long way to give the environments the feel that they have. Lots of retro-sounding tracks and melodies represented by slow analog arps and of the fetid Maya that come across as warm and comforting, and the eerie synthetic screams and wails of Cerebro Temple. Though the times where the game's atmosphere reaches its pinnacle is when the music stops completely, as though its presence keeps the feeling of the game going, and when it ends, something is going to happen. Through its music, the game is trying to transport you back to the age of the games that inspired it, and its graphics work hand in hand to do that. The sound effects are really unique but still keep that retro feeling. Glittering healing sounds, critical hits sound thunderous, and the wails and screams of enemies are strange and unsettling. But in there too are the chirping and purring of other animals and wildlife that populate the Great Well. There's no voice acting, but the oh-so-familiar Banjo-Kazooie style of talking that gives each character a different feel, despite not having any real voices. The reverb and directional audio work realistically, and overall the sound design is really great. That's 2 Harry Masons. Gore. The game contains blood magic, which is unique in concept, with certain spells requiring you to drain your health bar to cast them. Spraying certain plants with your blood activates them. There's a river of blood later in the game, but besides this and some vampiric powers, there's not very much gore in the game, which is a little disappointing considering all the blood magic and some of the activity of the cults. With areas like decrepit prisons and vampire castles, there should have been more blood in the game. That's still 2 Harry Masons.
Long ago, a great beast came from the sea and brought with it a poisonous fog that spread across the earth. Corrupting everything it reached, the poison fog slowly transformed the world and brought about a new age. Now, grounded by the poison sky and outnumbered by creatures, humankind became desperate and formed feudal kingdoms. Closed off from each other, they became paranoid and are on the brink of extinction. Those deemed undesirable, such as criminals or the ill, are cast out, banished into the depths of the Great Well, a pit of the diseased and undead. The Great Well is said to have but one door to the surface.
Story. You play as a thief who's thrown into the Great Well as punishment, their hand severed on the way down. I'm still not sure if you play as the disembodied hand or not, but your character isn't really important in the grand scheme of the game. The plot is limited to finding your way out of the Great Well, but the lore of the game is infinitely more interesting, with tales of previous expeditions, holy crusades, lost monks, deranged cults, creatures that seem to live in eternal agony, and you can find evidence of these by reading notes or just be told about them by a skeleton in the hub. There's lots of things I didn't uncover in my time with the game, but there were so many more interesting avenues to encounter with more exploration. The game's story isn't hugely original. Most of the things you experience are the kind of common tropes you'll find in other action RPGs with that dark fantasy twist. But they're still interesting because they're told in the same way as the From Software games, small snippets of information that require you to assemble the story on your own. Not enough to paint a full picture, but enough to make you want to know more. Making the final score 3 out of 5 Harry Masons. Lunacid is one of my favourite games of the year, and whilst its horror elements are quite light, it's too enticing not to talk about. With more time, I'd love to have gotten deeper into it and found more things. There's still Abdul's passage waiting for me to discover what's behind it. Again, I'd like to remind you the whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share his opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I got spooked by Amigo, I did not give up on the residents of the well and advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Don't always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.